All right, we are live now. Hello and welcome everyone to our live broadcast on growing into technical versus management ladder, focused primarily on software engineers. Today we have with us Anshuman, who's the co-founder of Scala Academy. He has been a software engineer to start with. He started his career with, I think, Facebook, and from there, now he is basically switched into an entrepreneurial role, which is more management focused. So he'll give insights about his life, how he transitioned into sort of a managerial role, and then we'll also speak about different companies and what are the typical engineering roles and managerial ladders in those companies. Welcome, Anshuman. Any few first words that you want to say?
No, thank you for having me. Very glad to be here. Happy sharing everything that I know. Help folks that I hear.
Sure. Cool. So we'll start off. I want to ask my audience that whatever questions you have, please keep your questions ready and keep posting them as comments. We'll take comments from the chat and we'll answer them one by one. Uh, in case you feel that we are going a little faster or we need more explanation, please message that in the comment section. We'll take that up and probably explain it at greater detail. Cool. Let's get started. To get started, we have taken few questions from our Discord community and Scalar group, and we have spoken to many people and collated a list of questions. We'll start off with those questions, and as your questions start coming in, we'll take questions from you guys as well. Right? Cool. So, Anshuman, I wanted to ask you that as a software engineer, what are the typical career paths that a person can choose?
Right. So almost everybody who starts into software engineering would start with a SD1 kind of a role, which is an entry level software engineer, where your responsibilities are to make sure like smaller tasks given to you are completed on time, bug free. But as your responsibilities grow, you grow as a software engineer. You become SD2, SD3, and so forth. However, I mean, that being said, that's not the only path that is ahead of you. If you're a software engineer, once you grow into becoming a senior software engineer, and once you grow in seniority, uh, if your inclination is towards management, you can actually go into engineering management, and you can become an engineering manager, or later on senior engineering manager, or director, or a VP of engineering. Um, or if you are more inclined towards, let's say, getting into product, you can then start exploring these entry level roles into product management, or project management, or technical program management, TPMs. However, I mean, the most commonly taken path are either grow within software engineering as an IC, which is individual contributor, or grow into a management role um, after a while, right? So then you become an engineering manager, and then you try moving along in the seniority level there.
So, help me understand what are the different roles and responsibilities across the engineering ladder and the management ladder. Maybe you can start with the engineering and then we move to the management
Sure,
ladder.
sure. What I can do is I can take the example of Facebook,
Sure.
and I can take about the leveling structure there in individual contributor role, which is software engineering, versus management roles, and what were the corresponding duties and responsibilities of somebody in those roles. Um, Now, when you go from Facebook to other companies, I mean, there is some amount of same structure at other more matured companies as well. So a Google, or a Microsoft, or an Amazon, um, and then most other companies have very similar structure. So that's the reason why I'm picking on Facebook. You can translate that to a very similar structure elsewhere as well. So Facebook's engineering levels actually start from E3. There is E3, then E4, then E5, then E6, E7, E8, and so forth. Um, any junior engineer who is a bachelor's typically joins at the E3 level, where the responsibilities are that you'd be given a task. task would would be very simple, very well defined, and it takes maybe a few hours to get the task done. The expectation there is, which is defines your performance, is that you're able to deliver on those tasks with bug-free code, with very high quality of code. The progression in the ladder happens when you are able to take up more complex problems. So, for example, E3 to E4 happens when you're already able to work on a feature level. Now, feature level means you're able to take a bigger problem, break it down into these smaller tasks, and then either do it yourself or get it done you with the help of other E3 engineers. So you're able to take a feature and deliver on it. That makes you an E4 engineer. Uh, the and in the leveling, just calling it out that the formula for promotion is that you're already doing the work of the next level for a sustained period of time. Then you get promotion. So E4 is being able to deliver on feature level. E4 to E5 transition happens when you can take a problem which has an ambiguous solution. You don't know whether that's even achievable or not. And then you're able to drive the solution using help from E4 and E3 engineers. And let me elaborate on that. Right? Imagine I am working in the Facebook messages team. I'm building Messenger, I'm building Facebook chat. There, if I am working on, let's say, the caching layer, let's say my team works on the caching layer of Facebook messages. And let's say I'm given a goal that today the entire caching layer takes, let's say, 100 milliseconds to respond or 200 milliseconds to respond. Bring down the latency by another 50 milliseconds. So make sure that the latency drops from, or the time taken to fetch anything from the caching layer drops from 100 milliseconds to 50 milliseconds. Now, whether that is feasible or not, I can't tell on day zero. I'll have to then go and dig into why it's taking 100 milliseconds. And I'll then have to figure out, are there things that I can do, or are there decisions I can take which can bring it down to 50 milliseconds, which would mean I might have to build a lot of feature level things which I would assign to E4s. There might be certain that I take it up myself. And there might be other tasks that I get done, right? So the point where you can take these problems with ambiguous solutions and can actually deliver on them, that's when you become an E5. And E5 is the one first true jump in your software engineering career. Once you are at E5, then actually you have a choice. You can continue to grow in the engineering ladder, and therefore you become E6 and E7 and E8, and there is no level beyond E8 and E9 in Facebook. Or you can actually change your track at that moment and come to the engineering management layer, and then you start from M0 is the basic level of engineering management. Completely your choice on what superpowers you have, where you feel more capable to deliver. For example, an M0, which is a person starting in the management ladder, would handle typically a team of 2 to 3, utilize that team to again get things done, would be able to manage their career expectations, would be able to help them plan their career and their next promotions, show them a path where they can grow in the company, help them optimize for their primary key results, which is typically around some or the other form of impact. So that's the responsibility of a M0. And then as you start to do that well, as the complexity of, again, the problem statement that your team handles increases, your team size also increases. And therefore you go from M0 to M1, M1 to M2, and then so forth, right? Like, and managers have public titles. So M0 to M1 means you become a senior engineering manager. M1 to M2 or M3 approximately means you become almost director of engineer, and then it grows as in the same order. So those are the two choices you have as the level grows. These are the um, basic responsibility chart. The growth from E5 to E6 again is what level and what complexity of problem. So, for example, the example I gave in E5 was an ambiguous problem on team level. when you start solving the same problem on a org level, for example, for the entire messages, if I give you a problem statement that, hey, bring down the end-to-end message delivery latency from, let's say, x number of seconds to x by 2 number of seconds, that's when you're solving it at an org level, and then you go from E5 to E6 if you're able to do that. And then therefore, I mean, if you want to do something at a company level, then you become E7, E8. If you start doing things on industry level, which means you're building software that now is changing the face of the industry. For example, Facebook built HPHP. Then you are an E8 or E9, which is the highest level possible in engineering within Facebook. Whether you choose engineering or management, completely dependent on your core capabilities, what you really enjoy doing.
Right. So, if you can throw some light on the day-to-day life of a manager also, because I think most of our audience is a software engineer, so they know what in and outs of what a software engineer does. But a typical engineer who's basically starting at a M0 kind of a level, what would be his role and responsibilities, and how does it compare to maybe a more senior manager?
Right. I can talk about what the day in day out of a manager, an engineering manager, look like, and what are the most common mistakes most
Yes.
junior engineering manager make. Um, the key core responsibility of a engineering manager is to prioritize the efficiency of their team. If I can get a lot of work done uh, by actually making sure my every single person in my team is just able to achieve a lot more with less amount of time, then I am doing a great job as an engineering manager. My team is extremely productive. Now, how do I do that? That doesn't mean that I have to start writing more code. That means I have to enable people that report to me. So, for example, there might be some people in my team who might not be performing well. So, helping understand what is causing that issue. Is it a skill issue or is it a will issue? Skill issue meaning I don't understand like certain technologies and therefore I'm struggling. So, helping create a path for them to actually learn and therefore then start doing well in their respective jobs. Or a will issue, which means like I don't feel very motivated by what I do, and therefore helping them see the bigger picture or helping them move to another project or another task which they might find more motivation in doing. That's the responsibility of an engineering manager. And while that's a very broad problem statement, that it translates to doing a lot of communication, a lot of one-on-ones with your reportees, very actively monitoring how things are going, um, talking very like proactively to other teams to understand the work that you are doing, can it actually benefit others? How do you how do you build and then make sure other teams use, let's say, some of the things that you built? That way it increases the impact of your team. Those become a lot more important than writing code. And the one of the most common mistakes I see very junior uh, engineers or engineering managers doing is that they they have some amount of affinity to writing code, and therefore they spend decent amount of time writing code themselves. The reality is, as an engineering manager, like, writing code is just a good to have. Nobody is going to say that you're a great engineering manager because you write code. You should know um, the ins and out of writing code. However, I mean, your success is defined by the productivity of your team. How good do people in your team feel about their work? They feel about their manager. How productive are they? Right. So all of your time should go in that. You shouldn't be fixated on writing code. Help people. You are like their mentor. You are their teacher to a certain extent. So help them. That should take up most of your time, actually all of your time, as you grow as manager. And the more fixated you would be on just writing code on a day to day, the slower your growth as engineering manager would be. And this is, by the way, a mistake I have also made. I used to look down upon people who would not write code because I believed, and this is, by the way, I was ignorant, and I believe that people who write code are superior. But that's, I mean, if you start looking at the framework of what do I want to achieve, what is the responsibility of an engineering manager, and what is helping me achieve that, you'll figure out that coding will not help you achieve the responsibilities of an engineering manager. spending a lot of time with people who report to you, helping build the right processes, helping processes build processes that enable them. That's um, going to make them more efficient. I'll just spend maybe 1 or 2 more minutes there. The other thing about engineering managers, which all of us have to understand, is that in the field of management, there is a concept of inheriting versus building. Great engineering managers. Let me first elaborate what inheriting versus building means. Inheritors are people who are given team, right? So when I say that, hey, look, I'm now managing 5 people, I expect that those 5 people would be given to me. Or let's say when I want to go from 5 to 10 people, managing 10 people, I expect that those additional 5 people would be given to me. So I'm inheriting in certain sense, right? Like there's somebody else doing the hard work of going and finding these people, and then I'm inheriting. Versus building, which is you say, hey, look, my team's responsibility is to go and get some XYZ work done, right? And I own building these things. By the way, here, if I had more people, here is what we could have also done, which is, by the way, going to increase my impact by some piece more. And hence, please allow me to go and hire more engineers. And then I go and hire those engineers. So my path from going to 5 to 10 isn't that somebody will come and give me 5 engineers, but I plan out how to go and hire and then increase the size of my team. That is the building persona. Engineering managers have to be builders. They have to proactively think about the scope of what their team does. How do they increase the impact of what their team does, be able to justify the impact, and then grow the team themselves, not be dependent on people. You're almost running a mini company inside. So great engineering managers would focus a lot more on that. And the junior engineers make the common mistake of focusing a lot more on coding than actually doing all of these things. So if at all you do choose the engineering management ladder, please focus more on these aspects than writing code daily. That's not going to move a lot of needles. Your team performance will move the needles.
Yeah. I hope this answers Weber questions as well. Can engineering manager code too, or is it an expected thing from an engineering manager? Shubham has an interesting point, interesting question that we have not touched. We've primarily focused our discussion on product companies,
Right.
but do you have any opinion on the service-based companies as well? The role of an engineer versus a manager.
Right. Look, I mean, I'd be wrong to say that I know a lot about service companies, and therefore I give a very deep insight into the engineering management versus IC ladder in service companies. I'll tell you what I have perceived. My perception is that as an IC, you grow with respect to number of years of experience in a particular tech stack. So, for example, if I'm a Java developer who has 6 years of experience, I'll obviously be a better IC, a more valued IC, uh, a higher paid engineer than a Java engineer who has 2 years of experience. So as your experience grows in a service company, your level slash status as a software engineer also grows in a service company. There might be internal level definitions as well, which maybe I'm not aware of. Um, and then there are managers who manage a team. They manage who sits out offsite, who sits out onsite. Um, they are in turn in some form responsible for delivery to the end client as well. um, and there again, like those managers would not write code. They would optimize. Their KPIs are driven by how happy are my clients, and is the project being delivered on time, with some bit of like, is my team happy, is my team growing, etc. But a lot of like, is my client happy, um, and a lot of is my work happening on time takes higher priority than the other stuff.
Right.
This is by the way, again, as let me disclaimer, I don't know the levels within service engineering companies enough to comment. This is my outside perception.
Sure. Sure. So you spoke about the enablers for a engineering manager, but in product companies, I've seen that there are many other ladders in the or if I call sister positions in the management ladder. There's a
Right.
person who looks after the product. There's a person who looks after maybe the other KPIs. So what are the different kind of management inside a typical product organization? and
Right,
what are
right.
the consequences?
No, so I mean, yes, I mean, the two paths that I talked about, which is continuing as a individual contributor and therefore growing as a software engineer, or getting into engineering management and growing there. These are the most frequently taken paths. There are certain paths less traveled as well, which I can probably elaborate on, which are adjacent to what you're doing. For example, certain people like product management work and therefore switch to product, and they start as product managers. And like there, the usual journey is that you would, if at all you do switch there and you have a lot of inclination to product management and therefore you have a high potential of doing well there, then you start as a associate product manager, APM, where you again, like just like E3s work on smaller tasks, APMs work on small product problems, very very small. For example, let's say changing what is written on a button, maybe A/B experimenting with that and seeing like what CTA, what call to action has the most amount of click through rate, right? Those are very very small starter tasks, and then you start growing in the product management ladder, which has its own rate of growth. Or certain people get started with um, TPM roles. TPMs are technical program management roles, where you start managing projects and the estimation of projects, delivery of projects. Make sure that every single stakeholder in that project is able to do things on time. If things are getting delayed, then every single person knows. Being able to more or less project manage in some sense, but a technical project, you're able to manage that. And a slightly wider term for that is project managers, which is, I mean, in the case of software engineers, probably makes sense more to go on the tech TPM side. So TPM and product management, those are two other adjacent verticals that people usually transfer over to.
I think the most common path that people take of software engineers take is the engineering management route, because they have been software engineers, they can relate to the problems that software engineers are facing, and hence contribute more over there. Having said that, like in a typical organization, how does these three functions? Because all of them are, three different roles. So, what is the boundary separation basically that separates a product manager from a TPM? Like, for example, if I have to develop Facebook Messenger, so what things would come from a product manager? What would be the role of TPM over here, and what would be the role of software engineer and an engineering manager? What would be the role over here?
Right, right. Let me first clarify that not all organizations would always have a TPM. TPMs come into existence once your scale grows beyond a level where it's becoming unmanageable to handle things across teams, especially if a project involves a lot of delivery across teams. Right? So there could be a lot of times when projects are being executed without a TPM in the picture, typically with engineering managers and product managers, where the split of responsibility is that product manager is responsible to um author the overall direction of the product. For example, being able to prioritize. Let me take the example of Facebook Messenger again, right? Now, when you look at Facebook Messenger, let's say the end goal or the OKR for a product manager might be that, hey, I today in United States, let's say there are X hundred millions of users who use Messenger. I want to increase that number to Y 100 million users, or uh, an average user spends X amount of time on Facebook Messenger. I want to increase that time from X to Y. Now, if a product manager is dealing with that KPI, then they would go digging deeper into what would get me there. And there they would go and talk to users, they would go and look at competition, what is competition doing. And let's say the product manager comes back and says, hey, look, the reason why certain people move over from Messenger to WhatsApp is because WhatsApp has much lower latency. It is faster, it can work on even weaker networks. So then that would be translated to a KR saying that, hey, look, I mean, we need to lower the latency of what Facebook Messenger from X to Y, or when somebody opens the app, it should open in some X number of milliseconds. When that KR is created, when that goal is created, that is then assigned to a E5, E6, E7 engineer, and there is a team that works on that goal with the engineer. And the engineering manager is the person who actually manages that team, makes sure everybody is accountable, everybody is delivering their best. E6, E7, E8 engineers are the ones who are then splitting that into tasks and giving that as responsibilities to the given engineers. Um, at the end of the day, whether or not this gets done by the engineering function is then the collective responsibility of this E6, E7 engineer plus your engineering manager. If this gets done, then whether the product metrics are achieved, which is, let's say, my number of users in the United States have increased from X to Y, or let's say the time spent on the app has been increased from X to Y, that is the responsibility of the product manager. So product manager is responsible for the product goal to a certain extent. When that translates to some number of tech things to be achieved, those tech things being achieved are the responsibility of senior IC engineers and engineering managers.
Understood. Understood. Now I'll take one question from comments. This question is by Sonika. She's asking, is there more growth in the managerial path than the technical path? I'm sure many in the audience would be, waiting to hear this answer. So, what are
Sure.
your thoughts?
um, Before I answer that, there is a myth that I want to bust.
Yes.
One of the very common perception in the Indian society especially is that managers are paid much higher as compared to people who grow into software engineering roles. Now, again, I don't know about the service company setup, to be honest, but in product companies, especially product companies that are international in nature, they have international presence. In fact, even in Indian product companies, I've seen that that is not the case. Or, and then there's a reason for that, right? A very, very good IC leader, an architect, or a principal engineer would have the same kind of impact to business as, let's say, a director of engineering can or a VP of engineering can. They both cannot function without each other. So therefore, both have ladders defined, as I talked about, like E5 to E6, E6 to E7, E7 to E8. Each of those have a salary band that somebody at E8 level would get paid from X to Y. Very similarly, management ladders also have levels: M0, M1, M2, M3, M4, and within that again there are payment bands. There is a one-on-one correlation. For example, an E6 would be at the same level as an M1, um, or let's say a higher E6 would be at the same level as an M2, and in that case, their pay scales are exactly the same. There is no distinction in the pay scale of a very senior IC person and the equivalent management ladder. So the pay scale is not differentiated there. You shouldn't take the decision to go to management just because you believe that that would pay you higher. That's not the case. Um, there is equal pay scale. You should figure out where you are more likely to do better. What is your core superpower? What is it that you are better at between management and between growing as a senior IC? Now, the second question was, hey, look, I mean, is growth in managerial path faster than in technical path? uh, Depends on person to person. Certain people have a knack of just being a very, very good problem solver and software developer, and therefore they are more likely to succeed as a senior IC and therefore grow faster there. And there are certain people who are more people person. They actually like interacting with people. They actually like optimizing on people performance, and they have been software engineers themselves, so they are more likely to grow faster in the engineering management ladder. A generic answer that whether one is better than the other is not true.
Understood. So I read this question online, which was that the question was by a person who has 15 years of experience, and the question was that uh, is aging a real factor in technical domain or an IC? Because it is really hard to keep yourself updated in the tech world. So is
Right.
that a factor that people should consider?
Right. I mean, so a lot of new age companies don't prefer people with a lot of experience, and I'll tell you why. And I don't believe that age is a factor there. There are other factors. A lot
Right.
of times, what happens is like when you grow in your roles, when you have a lot of experience, when you're of a certain age, the in some people, the agility to do things and being quick on the feet, being able to experiment fast enough, being able to take bold bets, that goes away. And it could be just a factor of how we have grown into in our software engineering careers, right? Like newer companies are bolder in nature, faster in nature, whereas like a lot of bigger companies that have been traditional, they don't encourage the same level of risk taking, etc., right? So it is less of ageism. It is more of being able to find people who are agile and can take risks and can make bold moves that helps you move forward. If companies are able to find people even with 20-25 years of experience who have that trait, they would readily hire. I'll give an example. um, the person who joined me as my manager uh, in Facebook, actually, he joined as a director of engineering. um, he came from Microsoft. He had 26 years of experience. So I mean, in today's time, would have now 32 to 33 years of experience. And he was the person who had actually led the team that built Windows XP. Now that person was hired as a leader in Facebook because the person still had the attributes of staying agile, working fast enough, being able to rationalize decisions, etc. So, and I had a bunch of people who were there with 20 years of experience, 25 years of experience, 30 years of experience. It's only a function of uh, how old is your mind, how young you are at taking risks and bets, and then like being able to quickly deliver. And then that goes in the entrepreneurship journey as well. You'll see like a lot of founders that of companies that are unicorn today. They're very young. At the same time, there are some founders who are old as well. Just a very subjective thing, person to person.
And just to clarify, the comparison that you did for a managerial growth in the managerial role as well as the engineering role, is it in Indian context or is it a global phenomenon? It's valid for US and other locations as well.
So this might not be valid for a service companies. In fact, a few of the friends that I know, I have learned from them that the growth in service companies, growth as a manager is usually faster than growth as an IC. However, this is true heavily for the global ecosystem and in most product companies in India. Um, this philosophy is followed where managers aren't uh, don't have a faster growth rate, but like both managers and ICs have faster growth rate. And it makes sense, right? Like for example, if you look at Flipkart has such a huge scale, or even Hotstar. Mohit, you were there. Hotstar has such a huge scale that having a brilliant engineer there who can help you build these large scale systems adds the same amount of value, if not more, than a manager who can handle, let's say, a team of 20-25 engineers. So both are important to Hotstar's journey, and like very similarly for Flipkart as well, both are important. um, an IC who can take these decisions and make sure systems scale. At the same time, managers who can manage a very highly efficient team, and therefore pay scales also reflect that.
Right. Makes sense. But does it also make sense for a smaller companies which are not very tech focused but ops heavy?
Right,
Uh,
right, right. So the complexity of problems, Mohit, in different kind of companies. I mean, I talked about scale in Hotstar and Flipkart. There is a second category of problem which is around product and the UX of the product. Um, Again, like having ICs who can build this product, which is just gives a significantly better product experience to the end engineers. There's a lot of attention to details to such companies makes a lot more difference. or actually same amount of difference as having an engineering manager who can handle a team of 5-10 engineers. So therefore there is a one-on-one equivalence there as well when you're building products, because really good engineers help you build very high NPS products.
Makes sense. So, at what point should a software engineer decide, or like, if I'm as SD, I enter as an SD1 in an organization. So, at what point should I start evaluating that I should go in a managerial role or should I continue in an IC role? What should be the tipping point, and what are the common traits that a typical engineer should look at?
Right. Actually, so when you're very junior engineer, at that point, to be honest, you don't even have the option. So as long as you are an SD1 or a just a beginner SD2, which in the Facebook's context was E3, E4 engineers, um, there isn't really a point of considering whether you want to be manager or an IC, because you can't become a manager. Then you have to be at least an E5 to become a manager. However, when you become an E5, then the sooner you can take a path and commit to that path, the better it is. I'll tell you why. For example, let's say I'd say that, hey, look, I want to grow as an individual contributor. So I want to grow on the engineering path. And let's say I go from E5 to E6, and then I go from E6 to E7. And then I feel that I'm stuck. I can't grow any further. Or maybe I feel stuck at E6 level itself, right? I don't feel that I can grow anymore, and I now start to have second thoughts on my choice, and I want to now go into the management ladder. When I do make that switch, even if I'm an E6 today, I'll have to start from M0. So I'll have to reset to a certain extent and start from M0, and just bet on the possibility that I'll grow faster here, which is, I mean, if in the overall ladder, if you see it, it, it is not an optimal path for you. It is not the most optimized path for you, right? So the sooner you can take that call, the better it is. How do you decide? You have to look, as I said, like, what do you enjoy more? Do you enjoy writing code in and out daily? That's you're I mean, you're more of an introvert persona. You like solving very complex problems. You like building things and seeing them in action. You like plugging in, as was said in the Social Network movie, which is you put your headphones on and then you just like coding for hours and hours. If that's what you like, then you probably do better as an IC. If, let's say, talking to people excites you, helping resolve problems with people excites you, then probably management ladder is where you have higher chances of success. Again, the nuances are more complex than what I just told you. That was oversimplification, but like that's very basic check.
And how about people who are inclined towards product? I see Facebook has a feature engineers as well. Right? There are system engineers who primarily work at improving the latencies and all, and there are product engineers who primarily whose objective is primarily to add features in the product. Think about new features that can be added, and then there are product managers. So, do you have any opinion on this as well?
Right. So I think it is just a function of like how you want to grow. What you described was a growth trajectory as a backend or infrastructure engineer versus a front end slash full stack slash product engineer. Um, Product engineers are usually people who love to build things and see things in action, see things rolled out there. They are at the front of getting visibility. Um, they like doing a lot of A/B experiments. For example, most of the Silicon Valley companies have a engineering team that is dedicated to growth, and those are like a lot of times the most effective, the biggest needle mover teams in those companies. And and like those growth people working on growth are people who obsess over products, who obsess over doing small changes and seeing like how the audience is reacting. They heavily index on A/B experiments. So if you're somebody who likes thing and seeing things in action when you build them, then you'll probably do really well as a product engineer. If you are somebody who likes working on very complex optimization problems, like solving problems gives you a high, um, more than anything. And like maybe visibility is something you don't care about that much, as long as you get great problems to solve, and then like you have a growth chart defined there, you'll do really really well as a backend engineer. For example, I was a second persona. I was a backend engineer than a product engineer in Facebook when I started my career, um, because I liked
That's it.
solving a complex problem.
That was basically my next question. So, what was your journey like? What kind of engineer you were, and how you transitioned into a managerial intensive entrepreneurial role?
Right. I at Facebook I started as a backend engineer, optimized on different kind of optimization problem, focus on optimization of different problems. And then slowly and slowly I mean, again, like as you grow into the roles, as you grow across the ladder, um, you become an E5, you become an E6, and so forth. You start to look at more holistic problems, and therefore I started getting more on the product side of things, starting looking at user experiences and then being able to optimize those user experiences. Um, and then I mean, to be honest, I really really enjoyed my work. I really loved my work there. One of the reasons, however, I mean today I do things very very differently. I don't code at all. I am more of an entrepreneur, so I optimize more for, again, the team efficiency, the company growth. Um, I spend a lot of time teaching now, um, and then the reason why that change or shift happened was, again, like when I was at Facebook, um, realized a bunch of problems in the Indian ecosystem. My own brother was studying in a tier 3 engineering college, got to see certain things that were happening there, felt very bad that things are the way they are. So I felt I could possibly contribute, and therefore I pitched the same to my now co-founder Abhimanyu, and then we both said like this is a problem worth dedicating time to, and therefore we left our jobs, came back to India, started doing this. And in this phase, then like once you get into the entrepreneurial journey, once you start running a company, then you do all kinds of stuff. I have been sitting on making back-to-back calls to people to get them referred to jobs. I've went on a lot of sales calls. I have I've done like a lot of B2B sales, B2C sales, um, contributed to marketing, anything and everything that the company demands, anything and everything that wherever like you want to fill the be a filler. I mean, that's where you go and contribute. So I'm less of an engineer now, more of a different function because of the journey.
Right. So you spoke about Scala. There's a question related to Scala. I'll take that. I'll let you read that. It's a long question. So.
Sure, sure. So the question is, hey, so I'm like 7 years back, passed out from a tier 2 college as a computer science engineer, but I went to prepare for UPSC, state PSC, and hence the entire time till now I was in that cycle, and now I want to get back to the IT sector. I started as a tech support, but I was good in Python coding before as well. My database and algo were good before. I want to change my life for better. Can Scalar give me a chance to do that? Um, Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, so look, I mean, the software ecosystem as well is moving towards a skill and capability based system. So, which is what can you as a engineer do rather than where you come from. A lot of companies are also moving in the direction where they are they're slowly giving up the requirement to you for you to even have a degree to work. um, and that's all very very positive change. So irrespective of your background, I would say like you should optimize for how much do you know today, what can you do today. um, I have never seen very very qualified software engineers, great software engineers, not succeed in careers, just because they came from not so great background. So Scalar can definitely help in learning the right things for you. I mean, in spite of Scalar as well, if you even if you learn the right things on your own, you'll still succeed, and succeed in the software engineering career. It's never too late. That's where I was going with this.
I think if anyone is interested to know about more about the program, they can log into our website, scala.com, and register on the website. They can, then we can call them back.
Right, and actually on the website as well, there's a free live class. I am
Yeah.
the person who usually takes that free live class. So if you're interested, please do join that free live class. I'm happy answering all questions about Scalar. I'll also maybe go into further details of solving certain problems in front of you, so that gives you a sense of how classes are done.
All right. The next question is by Rahul Anand. He says that how to deal with non-engineering manager. I think it's a deep-rooted belief in engineers that इसको अगर coding नहीं आती तो he's not a good manager. So how do there are two sets, right? One is the development expectation of a developer and the expectation of the engineering manager. How to tackle both?
Right. I mean, so the I think the one problem when you don't have domain relevance as a manager is that it's very hard for you to predict or sort of rationalize why certain engineering problems are hard versus why certain software engineering problems are easy to solve. For example, when somebody comes and tells me, "Hey, look, I mean, we need to lower the latency over this thing from a 2 second to a 1 second," and I go back and say, "Hey, look, this is what it will take," and here, let's say just changing this service to go from 200 millisecond to 100 millisecond will take us 2 months. Now, why am I saying 2 months? And what are the corresponding changes inside that service? Maybe a engineering manager who has some amount of technical background might be able to rationalize, and therefore maybe even give suggestions on maybe how to reach there faster. A non-tech manager might not be able to do that. So though there is I'm sorry for my dogs. There is some amount of domain that helps you be a better manager. That being said, I mean, I wouldn't say that non-tech managers are always bad. They might have other superpowers. They might actually be better at people management than a regular manager. Um, we humans tend to have, however, have bias, unconscious bias that, as Mohit said, that's just because somebody does not know coding, that person is inferior to me. It is very important that you let go of that bias and then evaluate a person objectively. What do you expect from your manager? Is your manager able to do that or not? A great managers, to be honest, are always people who would be on your side. They succeed when you succeed. It's very simple. For any engineering manager, the formula of success, at least in product companies, is that they would succeed when you succeed. So they're always on your side. Great engineering managers usually fight for people who report into them. So I mean, as long as your manager does that, um, and is aware of their weaknesses, and then therefore helps you get those technical advices from elsewhere, you don't need to just segregate out non-tech managers, non-tech engineering managers from your life. They're still good managers then.
So, the next question is around what is the right time, when is the right time to move for a managerial perspective role, as any specific time or experience as can take part for that particular leadership. Basically, what is the point at which they should decide? You said
Right.
they
So,
can transition from an E5 to M0 or an E6 to an M1. So,
right. No, so I mean the transition from E6 doesn't happen directly to M1. You still have to start from M0, and therefore I said like the sooner you make that call, the better it is. E5, when you become an E5, that's probably the point where you should think actively about this decision. Um, and I didn't understand the second part of the question, which is at any specific time or experience can take part for leadership. Um, Experience wise, I would say even in the role of E4, E5, you will have plenty of opportunity to help mentor some of the junior members in your team. For example, most companies hire interns, and for interns, people managing those interns need not always be engineering managers or director of engineering. You could very well be somebody who has an intern in your team and you're helping mentor them. um, Mentorship is a practice for engineering management, so do that and that might help you understand whether you're good at it or not.
sure. Next question is by Pramod. He's basically asking what are the skills to focus while shifting from technical to a managerial work. Companies outside don't hire tech leads for managerial. They ask for a prior managerial experience.
Right. So companies actually do two things. One is they index a lot on your prior managerial experience, and then they, as I said, like the primary responsibilities of a manager is to help their team be more productive. So they'll ask you questions. Well, they'll try to understand whether you inherited your team or whether you built your team. They'll ask you questions of how you did the performance management of your team, how you handled the bottom performers in the team. Have you had to fire people from your team? How did you manage that? How did you manage communication to the rest of the team? What is the practice you had put in place? When how frequently would you talk to people? um, what was your team able to do in a 6 month period or in a 1 year period? How many people did you have? Is that good productivity? Is that bad productivity? They would question and grill you on your previous experience. So, I mean, management, uh, it's like, unlike coding, in management it is not possible to say, hey, look, I'll just directly join this company as a VP of engineering and I'll directly get 200 people reporting into me, unless you have done just a version before that already. It is a factor of your previous experience in management.
Next question is by Kavita. Can you please talk about software engineer to product management part? Not necessarily product management in the same product that we are working on.
Right. I'll talk about the software engineer to an APM role, right? Like, which is associate product manager. What is an associate product manager able to do? Um, one is like whether you should even do that. The question there is then like, do you really enjoy building things, seeing product live, seeing people use it? Are you analytical in nature, in the sense that if I tell you a bunch of data points, are you able to put A, B, C, D together and being able to see pattern of what is working with your end consumers, what is not? Are you able to talk to people and then understand their needs? I mean, for example, very simply, if if I want a improvement feedback from somebody, right, and like people are usually very hesitant giving feedback because they know it will make me feel bad. Am I able to talk to them, and am I able to get those information from people in a way where they feel good about themselves? As a product manager, you'll do a lot of consumer interviews. You'll have to talk to people and you'll have to get those data points out from your end consumers. Do you like doing that? um, which is a big part of competition analysis and your user experience improvements. If you do that, then sure, I mean, you should look at a product management kind of a field. Usually the path there is that the hardest path, because I mean, product management isn't a field with a lot of volume. The hardest path is like, you want one person to take a bet on you to hire you as an APM. um, so there, I mean, there are a bunch of now companies that have come up that help people learn things to do that transition. For example, there is product school, PM school, kind of companies that help drive cohorts where they help you learn certain things about product management, how to build case studies, how to go about researching people, how to create personas of users, etc. Those are basic knowledge you need to even start working as a PM. So do that, or maybe you'll find a bunch of articles as well around on how to get started as a PM. Go through that, apply to companies. They'll give you a product case study. Try to do well there. If you do well there, then the first time the transition to APM happens, then you're set. Then your career starts to build up from there.
Uh, Next question is by Arijit. He's basically the question is around FOMO, that if you leave to a management track, would you miss coding? And is there like, can you take a U-turn and come back to coding in future?
Yes. So answer is yes. You can always take a U-turn and come back, and into the coding. And there is nothing like I'll forget coding. That never happens. It might just take you maybe a week or 2 weeks or maybe a month to get back into shape. But once you've learned coding, because you don't memorize coding, once you've learned coding, you'll always get back into the shape. That's that's a part of your muscle memory that you don't forget. So you can always come back to coding. I mean, there is nothing like I mean, I'm now obsolete in any fashion.
Uh, Arpit has two questions. I'll narrate both of them right now. He's asking which stream is better in terms of work-life balance, and also there's one more question, which is around which positions has like in terms of number of jobs, which has more number of jobs.
Right. Um, so first question: in which stream there is better work-life balance? Work-life balance, to be honest, is not a function of stream, but the company and the stage of the company. For example, let's say I work at a company X, which is very big, is probably not as fast moving as the other companies because they already have a lot of market leadership. There, all the managers, all the ICs, all the product managers, they'll all have a very, very high work life balance. Whereas there is another company that is probably a little early in nature. They're struggling to move forward. They're trying a lot of experiments. There, everybody, including the engineering manager, the ICs, as well as the product manager, they'll all have uh, work-life balance issues. If at all there is a function that enjoys better work-life balance, for example, if a manager makes sure that their team works really, really hard, but they have a very chill life, and those are bad teams, bad managers. Uh, in a work-life balance setup, like it's usually the company culture that drives it. So um, there isn't a skew with respect to stream. So answer to that, I mean, there is no stream in particular which has best work-life balance. Um, the companies. So go join the company where you'll find the best work-life balance. The second question is which position is better available in industry, which I think translates to number of positions in these sections. So um, very hard to answer, but there are more number of software engineering positions than there are product management positions. That is very clear to begin. For example, if you have a team of if there is a product manager, the product manager would be working with a team of 20, 25, 30 engineers at a time, or maybe 5 engineers or 10 engineers, and therefore the number of engineers are more in nature. um, Now, however, I mean, we are talking about the streams when you've become a senior engineer, SD E5 or above. The number of E5 of or above software engineers, the number of M0, M1, M2, M3, M4, and the number of product managers. There, I don't have the exact split. India is a little heavy on management, so India has more managers than actually very, very good ICs in the ladder. But I mean, globally, I don't know the exact split to be able to answer that question accurately.
I won't name the company, but I've been a part of company where there were more number of managers. We had at one point we had two managers managing one person.
Oh
Uh,
wow.
so that was the kind of split. All right, we'll move to the next question. Does MBA from a good college help in building skills and getting into product management roles in the field of IT?
um, MBAs in certain cases do, but I wouldn't say that they are a prerequisite. Um, MBAs are in no way prerequisite. MBAs, because there you'll if you just go on LinkedIn and search for product managers across companies, you'll find that a lot of companies they prefer product managers who have been software engineers in the past, um, especially like SaaS companies that build dev tools, right? For example, um, companies like Postman or companies like Browser Stack, you would see like a lot of product managers who get hired with heavy technical background and need not have an MBA in place, right? So it helps. It is, however, not a prerequisite. You can become a product manager even without an MBA.
From a limited exposure to service-based companies, what I've noticed is that people, service-based companies tend to hire more MBA grads as at managerial roles than going from a software engineer and then going into managerial roles. So, and uh, that has a different trajectory as well. In growth also, MBA does play a role. Having said that, the college also matters. from which you're doing an MBA. So just
Right. It is
and
just clarifying. All of my views are with respect to product companies and global companies because that is what I've had exposure to.
right. Cool. Next question is something that came up during our clubhouse session. Does sticking to IAC ladder lead to higher salaries or moving to EM?
Right, right. Actually, in most mature companies, there are defined bands for levels in IC as well as levels in engineering management, and those levels have one-on-one correlation, which means, for example, an M2 in Facebook and an E6 at Facebook would have same salaries, similar salaries. They would just have difference of titles, but they would have very very similar comparable salaries. So therefore, either of those are not beneficial to the other with respect to salaries. What matters is where you move up the ladder faster. For example, if you are a great IC and you just move faster up the ladder, your salaries would grow at a much faster pace. Or if you are a manager who grows really fast in the management ladder, your salaries will grow again at a much faster pace. But none of them are superior to each other with respect to salary bands,
Oh,
with respect to product companies and global companies. Again, caveat.
yeah. Cool. I'm just looking for a unique question. We've already discussed Narmit's question, which is around uh, how should one decide if he would be a good fit for a product manager. So I'm just looking for a question which we have not discussed. Cool. We can discuss this question probably. I have 10 years of experience in IT. How can I transition to a top product based company?
um, Same thing, which is, if you're getting to a product based company, there are certain things that product based companies index on with respect to engineering. For example, product based companies would care less about your tech stack. They would care a lot more about your problem solving skills. So given a random problem, can you write code on the spot, which is a function of how good are you at data structures and algorithms, how good are you at problem solving. The second thing that they usually test on, especially given your experience, is how good are you at design skills. And design is not the conventional design but more of engineering design. So low level design where you use certain design patterns to structure objects and classes the right way. Or system design where, like, if you're building a scalable system, then are you building it with the right components, right architecture, right sharding techniques, data sharding techniques, um, and making the right choice of software, etc. So they index very heavily on that, and then they do a very heavy assessment on behavioral aspect, which is whatever work you've done, that's all right, but do you really understand what you do? Do you really understand the decision choices that were made in that project? Were you were you driving it, or were you following? Those kind of things they want to dig deeper into because they want to hire people who can take initiatives and drive things. So it's never too late as long as you are good at these concepts. Now that should be enough to switch to top product companies. Now, whether they hire you as an SD2 or an SD3 or an SD4 or an M0, M1, M2, I don't know. Depends on your previous experience, your interview performance. Leveling gets decided later on.
I'm not sure if I get this question now, but this question, this guy has posted this question multiple times. Do you know what a RPA developer is? And if you know, then maybe the scope of it. I don't know what an RPA developer means.
Right. So this is again a construct within service companies. There are a bunch of tools that you have that people become developers of because those tools are used extensively for a certain project. For example, there are Salesforce developers, there are UiPath developers, and there are developers of different kind and they specialize in a tool of certain kind. the reality of those roles is that those roles are capped by, I mean, those roles only have relevance in service companies, and therefore those roles are capped to certain roles within the service companies, and therefore, I mean, the rate of growth, etc., is fairly slow. There is a upper cap that you'll, or upper ceiling you'll hit in some while in those kind of roles. Um, most, I mean, if you want to switch to a product company as a generic software developer, your experience as a as those specialized roles doesn't um, help much. So if you like it, do continue. But if you don't, I mean, I would advise to switch to a generic software developer role.
I think this question is quite relevant, and you would relate to it. In case someone is planning to leave, planning to have a startup in 3 4 years down the line, then what will be the ratio of manager skill versus technical one should be involved right now?
If you're planning to have a startup 3 to 4 years down the line, I would uh, that is some function of tech and a lot of function of business. So what I would advise you is that if you plan to do that, maybe the best thing you could do, and that's a mistake I made, was probably join a mid-level startup today, where you can see these things up close. You can see how the tech teams are being formed, what all challenges do you face, what how is business doing, how is business decisions being taken. Uh, Look at the overall picture, and that helps a lot more. Um, Being a manager then, or maybe a remaining a technical one, that's a minor decision, probably doesn't have a lot of effect on the overall outcome of the startup. But getting exposure to business and the framework to take decisions, that would have a decent impact on the outcome of your startup.
Got it. Uh, Next is by Kavita, basically comparing the growth rate of software engineer, engineering manager with the product manager. So we spoke about engineering manager and software engineer, but how does it compare to a product manager? I think that is something that we can.
Right, right. So, one of the realities of the tech Indian ecosystem today, and I don't know whether this will continue or not, is that there is shortage of really good product managers. And because that is the case, any function which has a shortage would have higher growth rate of salaries. So at present, in the Indian ecosystem, again, I'm rephrasing, in the Indian ecosystem, at present, the rate of growth of salaries of product managers is higher as compared to the rate of growth of salaries of, let's say, a software engineer, um, or let's say, engineering manager, because there is just dearth of really good product managers. It's very hard to find. If there are, however, a lot of people that start getting into product managers, that will then stabilize. At present, product manager vertical has a higher salary growth.
Got it. Next question is by Aman. He's basically asking that if he wants to be at a director of engineering kind of position, then should he choose an IT ladder or an EM ladder, or can he achieve both?
Oh, definitely EM ladder. Director of engineering is just like being able to handle a lot more people, right? So, in the M0, M1, M2, M3 structure that I was talking about, director of engineering is somewhere around M3 level, right? So you have to get into the engineering management ladder, be able to manage small teams, then slightly bigger teams, and then you manage an entire org, which is when you become a director of engineering.
And how about I think that would be true for a CTO kind of a role as well, right?
Correct. So, if you want to become a CTO, um, yeah, again, like getting into the management ladder would help you a lot, because again, the depending on the scale of the company, CTO of a mid-sized company is expected to do a lot more of engineering management related things: team building, team process setting, team optimizations, um, creating sub teams that will improve their efficiency, making sure everybody is aware of what their responsibilities are, what problem are they solving. There's 100% clarity there. That is what they do a lot more of. And then obviously, like design skills, etc., they still are a factor even for a CTO. But
Understood.
yes, completely EM ladder is like the way to go.
Right. Uh, Next question is by Keshav, who's asking why is it that most of the times uh, people become PM from a QA profile rather than switching to a developer profile? QA profile, why do they typically transfer to a manager profile?
Um, Actually, that's a very strange transition. So I don't have insight into that. Like, why would people go from QA profile to developer? Sorry, QA profile to PM profile. One of the most frequent transitions I've seen happen is that a lot of people who are business analyst or product analyst, they are more likely to transition into a product manager role, because then they have access to a lot of business metrics that, and they have worked very closely with product managers. QA profile switching to PM is a transition that is slightly lost on me, on why that would. That's a very interesting phenomenon, but I don't know why.
Right. I think that's we've covered all the question. Last question we'll take, which is from Kavita. Product management is a very domain specific, right? Does it become hard if one wants to switch companies, say from a networking to a finance kind of a
Right. Product management is very domain specific. Does it become hard if you want to switch companies, say from networking to finance, etc.? So there are certain principles of product management that stay the same as you switch as well, right? Like, I talked about process, I talked about user research, I talked about um, um, let's say doing A/B experiments. I talked about like how to break down higher level KRs into smaller initiatives. Um, those would remain the same across uh, wherever you're product manager. And certainly domain experience helps. For example, if I am in finance, maybe switching to another finance company, having that domain relevance I'll find it easier to perform really well as product managers. But it's not really a big blocker that I would never be. For example, if I'm today in a SaaS company, I'll never be able to become a product manager in a consumer based company. That's not true. You can if you have your basics solid.
Cool. I think we've answered most of the questions that were there, and most of the questions that were relevant to the topic. Uh, I see there are many questions which are basically asking for role switches, primarily maybe from a QA engineer or a support engineer to software engineering role, or maybe from a service-based company to a product-based company. We are going to do that session next week, so please tune in, subscribe to our channel so that you get notified about when we are doing that particular session. The date is still not final, but you can expect it by mid next week. We'll send out a notification. So please subscribe to our channel, right? And there are many other videos on our YouTube channel on system design, on PSA, and other topics as well. You can go through the videos. We take master classes on Sunday, where we and there are a bunch of other days as well. Where we teach about data structures and system design. So those are free to attend. You can go ahead and register for a free masterclass and attend those masterclasses and learn something from there as well. At the end, thank you so much, Anshuman, for taking time and explaining the entire journey of a software engineer. We discovered two tracks now. So, any last words from you?
No, I mean, I don't have any concluding statement. I mean, I only want to stress that there is a common myth that management is always better than all of the other verticals. That's not always true. Please follow what you really like. Please follow what you're passionate about. You'll have much higher chances of making it big, doing what you're really interested in, instead of switching to a fad or switching to some a popular opinion, which where you don't like doing what that fad asks you to do. So um, follow that principle is would be my advice.
Understood. Makes sense, Anshuman. Thank you so much, guys, for joining in. I'll see you in next week. Tomorrow also, Abhimanyu and Arnav will be doing a session. Please tune in at 5 p.m. tomorrow for the live session. Thank you so much. Bye bye.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, everyone.